Welcome into Black and Blue on this Monday, November 4th, 2013, and the internet has defeated us. Campus-wide internet outages here at the campus, so we are not going on live. We are going to pre-record this, and then you're probably going to listen to it, if you listen to it at all, after the game tonight, when everything I say will be irrelevant. Fun. It's probably mostly irrelevant anyway, most weeks. Welcome into the show. If you want to get in touch with the show, not now, because there is no internet, but if you want to get in touch with the show at any point throughout your day, if you're thinking of us and you just want to get in contact with us because you need to, it's at BlackBlueRAQ on Twitter. Go ahead and do that. We are on Mondays and Fridays at 4, unless the internet is dead. Then we're on whenever you click the play button on your podcast listening device. So what do we have on tap for you in this show that will be irrelevant in 6.5 hours? We are going to preview a game that's going to happen in about 3.5 hours that you will likely watch before you listen to this. Packers-Bears Super Ultimate Mega Blowout Extravaganza Preview. Woo! Get excited, everybody. But first, we have to start in Minnesota, where the Minnesota Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys played a football game. I'm sorry, I don't want to start here either. The Packers-Bears conversation is way more fun and way more relevant to the division, but we have a job to do here, guys. We have a job. We are here to cover all 4 teams kind of equally. And as such, we will start with the Minnesota Vikings, who actually went to Dallas, my bad, and fell to 1-7 on the season with a 27-23 loss to the Dallas Cowboys, who are now 5-4. If you watched the game, you saw how it all went down. Tony Romo leading his team down as they were trailing late. He hits Dwayne Harris for a 7-yard touchdown with 35 seconds left. That gives the Dallas Cowboys the win. And that's the Vikings season in a way, you know. Just there's some promise there, and then at the end, they just lose it a little bit. And Romo just went right down the field on him on that last drive. It was tough to watch, knowing what was on the line for the Vikings, knowing that. Well, I'm not going to say that their season was on the line because it wasn't. That's a lie. But knowing that, you know, here's a team that could fall to 1-7 after making the playoffs last year. And we spent a lot of time last week on their quarterback situation. We spent a lot of time on this show, period, about their quarterback situation. And they trotted out Christian Ponder again, and I laughed really, really, really hard last Friday at the idea of Christian Ponder giving them the best chance to win. Lo and behold, there they are with a chance to win. Their defense blows it for them. And Ponder on the day, 25 of 37, 236 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He wasn't bad. I mean, he wasn't great. He's not a game changer at the quarterback position. He'll never be. But on this day, Christian Ponder didn't kill them. You know, Christian Ponder wasn't a detriment to what the Minnesota Vikings were trying to do on this day. He was solid, I guess, is the word. Okay, maybe? As I mentioned, 236 yards, a touchdown. He did throw an interception. And on Friday, I spent a little bit of time saying how I thought if the Vikings were going to go into Dallas and pull off this upset, Ponder had to be a positive for them. Ponder had to be sort of a, you know, he's not, in most weeks he's a detriment to what they do, which is really not a nice thing to say, but it's true. In this game, he had to be a positive. He had to not hurt them. He had to help them. And in this game, he did that. He was a positive. He was, you know, he's not the reason they lost this game. And it's really hard to look at this game and see one reason that the Vikings lost. It was just a whole confluence of things, I suppose. If there is a criticism of Ponder still after that performance, which as I said was pretty good, you know, he completes 25 passes and all it goes for is 236 yards. It's tough for me to see a guy in Ponder who goes out there, he gets to throw the ball that many times, and he makes that many completions, and he only ends up with 236 yards. To me, it just reeks of a guy playing safe, playing in a way that he knew would help him maybe take control of the job a little bit. He didn't take chances. That's what Christian Ponder didn't do yesterday. And I like my quarterbacks to take a few chances every now and then. Because a lot of times when the really good ones take chances, they work and they result in big plays. And that's what the Vikings lacked yesterday out of the passing game. They lacked these big explosive plays that sometimes, or that a lot of teams sometimes need to sort of get them to the next level in a football game, to blow it open a little bit, to take control and momentum of a football game. And that is why, we're going to keep harping on this issue as long as it's an issue. I think they still have to go with Josh Freeman. I know Ponder played solid football yesterday, real solid football. But I think that's who he is. I think that's who Christian Ponder is a guy who will be solid on his best days and really bad on his worst. And I think, as I've mentioned a few times on the show, I think the ceiling for Josh Freeman is quite a bit higher than what it is for Ponder. I think Freeman's arm strength, which is something that Ponder just does not have, and you saw it on that last Hail Mary throw yesterday when they were trying to complete a miracle. Freeman's arm strength allows them to make those plays down the field that it was apparent that Ponder just physically can't make that type of play. And they have the weapons to do that. They have the weapons to go down the field. Greg Jennings is an effective downfield threat. Jerome Simpson is an effective downfield threat. Cordero Patterson can be an effective downfield threat. So I think Ponder played well yesterday. He played about as good as you could have expected him to play. But I still don't know if he did enough for me to warrant just giving him that starting job for the rest of the year and forgetting about it. Because I feel like the potential is higher on Freeman. And I feel like at some point this year, with him being a free agent after the season, you have to find out what you have in Josh Freeman. Because I think you know what you have in Christian Ponder. Of course, the Vikings offense, whenever you talk about it, it mostly centers around the Adrian Peterson monster. And he was a monster yesterday. 25 carries, 140 yards, and a touchdown. A bruising touchdown run that was, too. Just a lot like the one he had against the Packers, where he just would not give up, and he eventually found his way into the end zone. And there's not much to say about Adrian Peterson, which is weird. When you think about the Vikings, you think about Adrian Peterson. When you think about the offense, you think, he's the focal point of that offense. But there's not much to say about him. Peterson is just who he is at this point. He's really, 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 really good every week. And it doesn't spawn a lot of topics. Obviously, the one topic on Peterson this year was tragic. But there's just not much to say about Adrian Peterson. There's not much to say about sustained excellence week in and week out like Adrian Peterson manages to do. A more interesting rushing number to me was this. Christian Ponder on the day yesterday, 4 carries, 29 yards, and a touchdown. Ponder yesterday, outside of being solid throwing the ball, he was really pretty decent at keeping plays alive and making plays with his feet. A couple third down runs. He'd get out of the pocket if there was no one open. He would, if a lane opened up the middle, he wouldn't be afraid to take the ball there. That was a positive for me. That's something that Christian Ponder can do that separates him from other quarterbacks a little bit. He's got a bit of mobility. Now only 29 yards, but 4 carries. It's something for Ponder. If they're going to keep putting him out there, it's something for Ponder, I think, to build on. That mobility. Maybe get him some rollouts. Maybe do some things on the run. Maybe even run a read option play here and there, because everyone's going to crash on Peterson. So overall, I think yesterday, just a pleasant surprise out of Christian Ponder. And I would still go with Freeman, but it's the kind of performance that makes me regret laughing at him openly on the radio on Friday. So at least he had that going for him. Moving on a little bit, we will get to some other numbers from this game. Greg Jennings, 6 catches, 56 yards. And why that's important is what I'm about to say next. Is Kyle Rudolph, their tight end, Christian Ponder's real safety valve, the guy he looks to in third down situations, the guy he looks to when everyone else is covered. Kyle Rudolph, their tight end, broken foot yesterday. He's going to be out about a month, I suppose, or I've heard, with that broken foot. 30 catches on the year for Kyle Rudolph, 313 yards, 3 touchdowns. And how that ties into Greg Jennings, I think, is Jennings now becomes the guy, the possession guy, the guy Ponder has to look for when he has no one else. And I think it's a big step up in role for Jennings, and it's probably a role that Jennings, as the guy who's being paid $1 billion, should be filling anyway. And he filled it decently yesterday. Only 56 yards with 6 catches, possession stats. He's going to be that guy now, I would think, running the short routes, running the crossing routes, but Ponder never seems to find him on. It's going to be Jennings' show in this receiving core, and it's going to be really interesting to see now that he's got this, now that he's got his shot to be the only guy out there, really, that Ponder's going to be able to count on. Will Jennings take advantage? Will he take advantage of this shot and start putting up the numbers that we were used to seeing him put up in Green Bay, even despite the quality of the person throwing in the football? Defensively for the Vikings yesterday and offensively for the for the Dallas Cowboys, Romo on the day, 34 of 51, 337 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. Jason Witten, 8 catches, 102 yards and a touchdown. Des Bryant, 6 catches for 64. Cole Beasley, 6 for 68. So no one really went overly insane against this Vikings defense. Decent numbers out of Romo, 337 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception, but he had to throw it 34 times, or he had to complete it 34 times and throw it 51 to get to those numbers. Witten, 8 catches, 102 yards, but again, if Romo is throwing it 34 times, 17 of them are probably going to Witten. So, this is a game. I think the Vikings they're gonna be mad at themselves a little bit on this one, because every unit of their team, it seems, played either anywhere from decent to pretty well. And it's a game they let slip away from them, and it's a game they should have won, probably. Given the way their offense played, given the way their defense really stifled the Cowboys in a way that, bend but don't break, I suppose. And what really was impressive to me yesterday, and I know Dallas doesn't run the ball a ton to begin with, but the Vikings' run defense was good enough yesterday to make them completely abandon that running game. Here's Dallas's complete rushing stats yesterday. DeMarco Murray, 4 carries, 31 yards. That led the team in carries and yards. Tony Romo, 1 carry, 8 yards. Joseph Randle, 1 carry, 3 yards. Jolan Dunbar, 3 carries, 0 yards. All of that adds up to 9 carries for 42 yards. Now, did Dallas just abandon the running game because that's what they do? They pass and they pass and they pass and they pass? Maybe. But I think Minnesota's ability to really stifle them and to make it almost pointless for them to keep trying it played into it. And the Vikings defense in this game came in allowing 113 yards rushing per game. So they stepped up in a way, but I don't get it from Dallas's point of view. I don't get abandoning it. As I said, 9 carries the entire game, and one of them was Tony Romo. Murray, 4 carries for 31 yards. That's not bad. That's almost, what is that? Over almost 8 yards a carry? I don't get it from Dallas's point of view. Why abandon the running game in that way? Why willingly throw your offense that far out of balance? 51 passes, 9 runs. It doesn't make a ton of sense from the Dallas perspective, but I guess it's tough to argue with it since it worked. They won the game. But this is a Minnesota team that came in 1-6, and they came in not playing very well. And Dallas needed a touchdown with 35 seconds left to win. So there's plenty, I think, to complain about on the Dallas side. And it starts, to me, with play calling, because I don't care what Minnesota's doing to stifle your run game, and they did it pretty well yesterday. You can't only run the ball 9 times in an NFL game. There has to be some semblance of balance. And to me, Romo only putting up 337 on 34 completions suggests Minnesota was doing a pretty decent job of limiting the passing game. So why not try running the football at all? I don't get it, but it worked for Dallas, and they got the win with 35 seconds left. As I mentioned, a heartbreaker for the Minnesota Vikings, who now fall to 1-7, and that officially does it on this season for the Minnesota Vikings. Anyone who was clinging to hope after last week, thinking, hey, they could reel off 9 straight. They were in the playoffs last year. They were good last year. It's possible. Not anymore, it's not. And I think it's time to see what you've got for 2014. And that starts at the quarterback position. As I mentioned up top, I think you've got to go with Josh Freeman. You've got to see, is this a guy we want to bring back after the season because he's going to be a free agent? Or do we want to move on? You've got to see what you have in Freeman. See if you've stumbled upon your franchise guy completely by accident. Or see if you can move on from him, probably move on from Ponder, and start fresh at that position in 2014. Another thing I think they've got to do now going forward at 1-7 is just unleash Cordero Patterson. They don't seem ready to do it yet offensively. They don't seem ready to really commit to him as a sort of playmaker for them, as sort of that Percy Harvin type guy. Get him in there, get him a bunch of reps going forward, and just let him be an explosive guy. And by the end of the year, you'll know if he can do that offensively or if he's just a special teams guy. And if Patterson goes out and he performs and he plays really well, he can build a mountain of confidence going into 2014, and he can be even better there. I think Cordero Patterson going forward has to be a huge part of this Vikings offense as they try and find out some things about themselves going into the 2014 season and who they're going to be. But we do move on now, and we move on from that game to tonight's game. And it is the Super Ultra Mega Blowout Extravaganza, whatever I said before. It's the Packers and Bears on Monday Night Football. And as we get set here to talk about Packers and Bears, the NFL's oldest rivalry, I suppose they call it, because it is. And we're going to get a whole bunch of history now as a backdrop for tonight's game between the Packers and the Bears. And we start at the beginning. The rivalry began in 1921. There has been 186 games in this rivalry. It is not the NFL's longest continuous rivalry. If you hear someone describe it as such, they are wrong. In 1982, the strike-shortened season that year, the Packers and the Bears did not play a football game, which means it's not a continuous rivalry. The longest continuous rivalry, you ask? That goes to the Packers and the Lions, who have played every year for a lot of years. I didn't even know that was a rivalry. That just happens to be two teams playing against each other. I don't hate the Lions. Overall record, 92 wins for the Bears, 88 wins for the Packers, 6 ties. The Packers are on a 6-game winning streak coming in, the longest streaks in the history of the rivalry. Green Bay, 10 wins, 1994 to 1998. Chicago's longest streak is 8 wins, 1985 to 1988. The first meeting between these two in history was a 20-0 Chicago Bears victory on November 27, 1921. And now with those footnotes out of the way, we are going to get into it. We are going to cover a lot of history here, a ton of notable games from this franchise, or from this rivalry, that really stick in NFL lore or just amused me as I read the recaps of them. It's either one, really. Notable games. We start on November 23rd, 1924. That game ended 3-0, a Chicago Bears victory. And it is notable for this reason, really, and the only reason I wrote it down. Frank Haney of the Chicago Bears and Tilly Voss of the Green Bay Packers received the first ever ejections in an NFL game for fighting. How's that for a rivalry? We're going to skip ahead now 17 years, and we skip ahead to November 2nd, 1941. A 16-14 Green Bay Packers victory this time. And why is this game notable? The Chicago Bears in 1941 were a juggernaut. They came into this game undefeated on the season. They won their first 5 games by a combined 157 points. 157 points. Obviously, the Packers were huge underdogs coming into this game. They pull off the upset, as I mentioned, 16-14. But a month and a half later, on December 14th, 1941, Chicago would get their revenge in the first ever playoff meeting between these two clubs. 33-14 Chicago victory. Chicago wins this playoff game, and it was a one-game playoff. They take the Western Division, it was known at the time. And that would advance them to the NFL title game, where they would defeat the New York Giants for the NFL championship in 1941. Skipping ahead now 30 years, and this is one of them I just wrote down because it amused me. An exhibition game played between these two teams on August 7th, 1971. The Chicago Bears win this exhibition game 2-0. And why do they win it 2-0? Because Frank Patrick, a drafted tight end, playing quarterback for the Green Bay Packers for some reason, dropped back to pass and kept dropping back and ended out the back of his own end zone. Those were the only points scored in the game. Chicago wins 2-0. He pulled a Dan Orlovsky. Maybe Dan Orlovsky, his thing should be called pulling a Frank Patrick, because that is splendid. For the only points in the game, drifting out the back of the end zone and conceding a safety. Skipping ahead now to September 7th, 1980. A 12-6 Green Bay Packers victory, and another one that I just wrote down because it made me laugh. This game went into overtime 6-6, where Alan Page would block a Chester Markle field goal that was up to win the game. The ball would bounce off Alan Page's helmet, and before anybody realized it, Chester Markle, the kicker, had scooped up the ball and run it in for the game-winning touchdown. Packers win 12-6. I really loved putting together this segment. I learned so much about, there's this intense rivalry between these two teams, but I learned so much about just some of the weird stuff that's happened, like that, and like the Frank Patrick thing, and the two guys being the first two ever ejected for fighting. Just a lot of really interesting little tidbits that I didn't know about this rivalry before today, really. Later that season, after the Chester Markle miracle bounce, I suppose, the Chicago Bears, on December 7th, 1980, would put it on the Green Bay Packers in a way that has never happened before in this rivalry. The Bears on this day would win 61-7. Now, I know the 1980s Green Bay Packers were not very good at football, but that's a little ridiculous. That's something's up there. 61-7. Something's going on. And it turned out something was going on. Bill Tobin, hired as vice president of player personnel by the Chicago Bears 5 years after Bart Starr fired him from the Green Bay Packers in 1975. Keep in mind, Bart Starr was the coach of the Green Bay Packers at this time. Tobin was tasked by the Bears with decoding the Packers' signals to their quarterbacks. Which, doesn't seem like the most savory of practices, really, but he did it. And it really, really worked. And to quote Tobin, quote, "We wanted 100 points. They didn't quite get there, but they got, darn close." And a second, less school-appropriate quote, It couldn't have happened to a nicer bunch of... Well, that tells you all you really need to know about this rivalry. Where people are willing to cheat, they're willing to name call, and it just gets added to the lore of this rivalry. So many weird stories, so many layers to this rivalry, and that's one of them. And it was one of the ones I found most interesting. Just that the Bears decided to task a guy with stealing quarterback signals, and he did it with great malice, and it worked completely. They won 61-7. Skipping ahead now even further to 1986, November 23rd, 1986, a 12-10 Chicago Bears victory on this day. But the game wasn't what was notable about this. Well, this final score wasn't what was notable about this. The final score wasn't even the most notable numbers from this game, because defensive end for the Green Bay Packers, Charles Martin, wore a towel this day with a hit list on it of Chicago Bears players. He had their numbers written on it, and he was going to get them. But Walter Payton was on that list, a few others, and Jim McMahon was on this list. And poor Jim McMahon. McMahon throws an interception, and you can find the video of this on YouTube, and it is not great from Charles Martin's perspective. McMahon throws an interception, and to try and describe this for you, I'm just going to say Martin stands there. He watches the interception happen. He watches the interceptor get tackled. He turns to Jim McMahon. He grabs him, and he throws him into the ground as hard as he can, as late as I've ever seen a hit. McMahon would separate his shoulder on the play, which would mean Martin got to cross off someone on his list, I suppose. Martin would get a 2-game suspension from the NFL, which at the time was the longest in NFL history. And really, I think when you go to, if you wanted to summarize the entire Green Bay Packers Chicago Bear rivalry in one play, that's about as good as you could do right there. And it's a play I think that, I don't know that so much Bears fans talk about it anymore, but I still hear about it on occasion from Packers fans who talk about that play. And as a Packers fan myself, I'm not totally sure it's something I'm proud of or something I'm happy happened, but it is an interesting footnote, and it is interesting video if you can find it out there, because it's just something you don't see anymore. And if in this day of player safety, if Charles Martin did that today, I don't think he'd ever play football again. So definitely go out there and seek that video out if you've never seen it. It's certainly something. 3 years later, the Bears and the Packers would engage in what is known as the Instant Replay game on November 5th, 1989. A 14-13 Green Bay Packers win with an asterisk if you ask Mike Ditka. And what happened here is really the precursor to what we have now. Don Mikowski on the final play of the game throws a game-winning touchdown, which was initially disallowed due to him being judged to be across the line of scrimmage. The play goes to video review, and eventually the replay official awards the Packers a touchdown, saying he wasn't across the line of scrimmage. The rule would actually end up being rewritten because of this. It would be something about, I believe they used to judge it based on whether the ball was across the line of scrimmage. Now it's any part of you is behind the line of scrimmage, you're good. The Packers would win this game on that replay official's decision. Mike Ditka, as I briefly mentioned, would order all future team publications to put an asterisk next to the final score of this game in the future. 5 years later, it was October 31st, Halloween 1994, and the Green Bay Packers would win a blowout, really, 33-6 over the Chicago Bears. And what's notable about this is it's the first win for Brett Favre against the Chicago Bears. And Favre would develop a reputation as the Chicago Bears killer, because this was the first of 10 in a row for the Green Bay Packers in this rivalry. and of 11 in a row in Chicago for the Green Bay Packers. Both of them rivalry records. So the dominance of the Bears in the 1980s, they were very, very dominant. They beat the Packers a lot. That started to turn, and it started here on October 31st, 1994. And this rivalry would kind of switch fortunes, and the Packers would become the power for a while. And the Bears would obviously fall victim to that. A year later, November 12th, 1995, a 35-28 Green Bay Packers win. Why is this game notable? I just told you they won 10 in a row, so why would I bring this up? For a Brett Favre story. Brett Favre, coming into this game, had a badly sprained ankle. And as we all know about Brett Favre, whenever he has a badly injured whatever, he plays anyway, because that's what he does. Favre did not practice until Friday on this week. His status was uncertain going into this football game with that badly sprained ankle. He would give it a go because that's what Brett Favre does. What else does Brett Favre do when he's playing pretty hurt? You guessed it, he puts up monster numbers. Favre on this day, 25 of 33 for 336 yards and 5 touchdowns on a badly sprained ankle that made him a game-time decision. Not only is this notable for Favre being a hero, but this game was huge. It was a game in November 12th, as I mentioned. This was for first place in the old NFC Central. This win gave the Packers the tiebreaker, put both teams at 6-4, and the Packers, I believe, would go on to win this division for, I don't know if it was 1995, the first time in 20 whatever years, or was it 94? It was one of them. But this was a swing game, and the Packers would go on to win the division that year. And a big reason for it was Favre's heroics on that day. Skipping ahead 4 years, November 7th, 1999, a 14-13 Bears win. The first game since the passing of Walter Payton for the Chicago Bears. And on that day, they would end the Packers' winning streak at 10 on a blocked field goal by defensive tackle Brian Robinson. So the Bears finally ending the Packers' reign of terror in the 90s there. And then it was a little mundane for a little while. Not a ton that was really, really interesting happened in this rivalry. So we skip ahead quite a ways to September 10th, 2006, season opener, a 26-0 Chicago Bears win. Notable for a couple small reasons. This was the first time in the career of Brett Favre that he was shut out. As I mentioned, the Bears win this one 26-0. And this was the first game in the career of Devin Hester where he returned a punt return for a touchdown. Obviously, many teams have been burnt by Hester since. Teams are still being burned by Devin Hester. But in the footnote of history, his first punt return touchdown of his illustrious career came against the Green Bay Packers. 2.5 years later, on December 22nd, 2008, a 20-17 Chicago Bears victory in what is the coldest game in Chicago Bears history. The game at the time was 2 degrees. It was 2 degrees outside at kickoff with a -13 wind chill that day. So obviously you get two teams this northern, you're going to get cold weather games. That, I believe, was the coldest in the history of the rivalry as well. It had to have been. It was the coldest in Bears history. Then we skip ahead 3 years to, I think, you can debate this with between this one and the 1941 playoff game. But I think this is probably the biggest game in the history of this rivalry. 186 meetings, I believe it was. Yeah, 186 meetings. January 23rd, 2011, I believe, was the biggest meeting in all of those 186. And it was a 21-14 Green Bay Packers win. And of course, if you're a Packers fan or if you're a Bears fan, you remember this was the day of the NFC Championship game in Soldier Field. This game was the first time since 1941 that these two teams had met in the playoffs. And we'll take you back a little bit to that game, just a couple of things that happened. You will probably definitely remember Jay Cutler was hurt during that game. Cutler But you'll definitely remember the visual of him standing on the sidelines in a coat, watching with sad face as his team. Really, they played a heck of a game considering the circumstances. They would come up just short. Cutler, obviously, at the time, would take a whole bunch of unwarranted junk for not playing injured. As it was revealed after the game, I believe that he had a severe knee injury. Or a severe injury of some kind. I just remember it was severe. Caleb Haney is the guy who came on in relief in that game. Todd Collins would come on for a little bit. He was bad. They'd bring in Haney because you're in the playoffs. You got to try something. And Haney would very, very nearly, as the third-string quarterback of the Chicago Bears, he'd very, very nearly lead them to a Super Bowl. But late in the game, B.J. Raji gets a pick six, runs it into the end zone. The big man scores, giving the Packers a 21-7 lead. The Bears, though, credit to them after that. They answer with a lightning-fast touchdown drive. Gets them right back into this, makes it 21-14. They'd get the ball back. End of the game, Haney's driving. They're in Packers territory, but Sam Shields would step in front of a Caleb Haney pass. He'd make the catch. He'd run it back for a little bit. And as Joe Buck said at the time, the Packers would ride that to the Super Bowl. And they would win Super Bowl 35, 31-24, Super Bowl 45, 31-25 over the Pittsburgh Steelers. So of all the 186 games so far in this rivalry, the Bears have the edge in overall record. We'll get to some even more in-depth statistics in a second. But I do think the Packers, they get bragging rights for having won what I believe is the biggest game in the history of this rivalry. The teams as a whole, just even outside of this rivalry, the Chicago Bears coming in their history are 722 and 531 with 42 ties. The Green Bay Packers are 693 and 540 with 36 ties. NFL titles, Bears have 9 of them, the Green Bay Packers have 13. And division titles, whether it be the Western Division, whether it be the NFC Central, whether it be the NFC North. Chicago has 18 division titles, the Green Bay Packers have 15. Again, just looking at the series as a whole, 91 wins for the Bears, 87 for the Packers, 6 ties. Total points scored in this series. If you took all 186 games, laid them end to end like one game, who would win? It's the Chicago Bears. The Bears have scored 3,133 points in this series. The Packers have scored 3,075. Pretty even when you consider almost 200 games played. The last meeting of these two rivals was December 26th or December 16th of last year, a 21-13 Green Bay Packers win, and on that day, the Packers would clinch the NFC North title last season. They would move to 10-4 with the victory, and notable really because much like this season, the Packers got off to a rough start last year. 2-3, they would win this game against the Bears and move to 10-4, so that means they rattled off an 8-1 stretch. I believe they'd win the next week as well and move to 9-1. So, and this at the time was two franchises last year going in opposite directions. The Packers win that game, they moved to 10-4 after that 2-3 start. The Bears started 7-1 last year. They'd lose this game, they'd fall to 8-6. I believe they'd finish, was it 9-7 or 8-8, one of the two. And just some notable things I found in the game recap. I believe I read ESPN.com's game recap for this. Jay Cutler, in his time as Chicago Bears quarterback, he's been intercepted 17 times versus the Green Bay Packers, but 10 of them have come in the last 5 games he's played against the Green Bay Packers. One of his interceptions here would lead to the last touchdown that the Green Bay Packers got, which would really put this game out of reach. Aaron Rodgers on the day, 23 of 36, 291 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Jay Cutler on the day, 12 of 21, 136 yards, a touchdown and interception. Some other stats for you. James Jones, who might play tonight, we'll get to that in a second. James Jones, 5 catches, 60 yards, but 3 touchdowns. Matt Forte, 20 carries, 69 yards. And with Josh McCown starting, he's going to have to do better than that tonight. Alex Green, 13 carries, 35 yards. That was the Packers' leading rusher, and that was the story for a lot of last year. And as I looked at some box scores last year, it's weird to me to see that the Packers are able to run the ball after how bad they've been at it for so long. And Alex Green last year against the Bears, 13 carries, 35 yards. You would expect Eddie Lacy to do better than that tonight because Eddie Lacy's just a better running back. That's a fact. Clay Matthews, who will not play tonight, 2 sacks in the game last year. Brandon Marshall, 6 catches, 56 yards and a touchdown. Notable, I think, a little bit too, because last year, Brandon Marshall was a big acquisition for the Bears last year, and the Packers in 2 games really did well shutting him down. Remember, in the first game, it was a Thursday night game. I remember NFL Network, big hype coming into this game. Packers need this game. I believe they were 1-2 at the time. They need this game. Maybe they were even 1-3 by then. I don't remember. But Brandon Marshall comes in. If I remember right, he was talking a bunch. Shields and company, because I don't think it was just Sam Shields at this point. Marshall was held in the opener last year to 2 catches, 24 yards. And with all the motivation in the world behind him, in the follow-up meeting, he'd only get 6 catches for 56 and a score. So the Packers in 2 games last year really showed they could shut down Brandon Marshall. And you know Josh McCown's going to be looking for him tonight, so it'll be interesting to see if the Packers can keep Marshall down the way that they've been keeping him down when they've played him in the past. That's a lot of history. So let's move on to tonight. And tonight it is the Josh McCown show. We've covered him at length on Friday's show. A solid guy, about as many touchdowns as his interceptions. He doesn't seem like the type of guy, if this turns into a shootout, if Rodgers and Lacy start doing whatever they want, the Packers start putting up points, he doesn't seem like the type of guy who's going to be able to allow the Bears to keep up. But obviously, a lot of this game relies on how Josh McCown is going to play tonight. Look at some injuries going into this game, and the injury reports are out now, so we'll get some definitive answers. Unless you're James Jones, who comes in questionable. The internet's been down here all day, as I mentioned at the top of the show. I don't know if he's going to be active tonight. I don't know if he's going to be inactive. We'll see. But the official word on James Jones, as of the injury report today, is that he's questionable going into this game. Nick Perry is doubtful. Hopefully the Packers will get him back soon, and hopefully he steps back in and plays as well as he was playing before that injury. Sam Shields did not practice on Saturday. He's listed on the injury report. His injury is just, quote, toes. That's his injury. His toes are hurt. Shields, though, is listed as probable. I would imagine he'll be lined up one-on-one with Brandon Marshall most of the night. That is a good matchup to watch as you're sitting at home. Just identify where Marshall is pre-snap and keep an eye on that, because him and Shields are going to be going at it all night, you would imagine. Charles Tillman is going to start for the Bears for the first time in a few weeks. Obviously, that puts the Packers offense on lookout. Tillman, as you know, is the best in the National Football League at forcing fumbles. So that's a big guy for the Bears to have back on a night where they're going to have to cause all sorts of havoc and some turnovers to really give their offense a chance. A refresher on the prediction that I put out there on Friday. I don't think the Bears defense will be able to stifle the Packers offense enough. They're hurt. Lance Briggs is out. Henry Melton's out. And I think Josh McCown is ill-equipped for the shootout he may end up involved in tonight, whether he likes it or not. Give me the Packers 34, Bears 20 in this one. And since we are pre-recording this, and we want, in the interest of trying to get this out there with time for you to listen to it before the game, so it's actually relevant, we're going to wrap up here a little shorter than we normally do, but we are going to wrap up. We're going to have your players of the week on the Twitter account tomorrow, probably, since right now, if I try to do it today, it would just be Vikings. Thanks, Lions, for being on the bye. Friday, we will hopefully be live for you on the internet radio. I would imagine the internet will be back by then. We'll preview all the weekend's actions. I don't know who anyone plays because I wasn't able to look up their schedule today. we will do some other stuff. I don't know what, but, you know, we'll do some other stuff. So we'll figure something out. We'll get the internet back. We'll get rocking and rolling here. We'll have a good show for you on Friday. Thanks for listening tonight. I got a new sound effects machine if you didn't notice. Thanks for listening tonight. Obviously, thanks for downloading this, because that's what you're going to have to do if you want to hear this show. I would say stay tuned, but, you know, this is a download. Do whatever you want. Maybe go watch the game after this. Have a good night. We'll see you on Friday. Thanks for listening.